The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call Stuart Nash.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Okay, here we go. Mr. Speaker, with a bill named the Taxation Transformation First Phase Simplification Other Measures Bill, you would expect something at least transformational, wouldn't you? You would hope that a piece of legislation actually represents what it is. At least the name would represent what it is, transformational. Here we are, Mr. Speaker. We're in an era where we have a whole lot of problems with our tax system at the moment. We're in an era where the Reserve Bank has said that 40% of all homes purchased in Auckland are done by speculators, and the Reserve Bank Governor said that they're bought for capital gain because the yields are so low. And yet, no capital gains tax. We have a bright line test. We have a bright line test that the IRD said is insufficient to do anything with the housing market. Mr. Speaker, what we've also got is we've got a massive risk to our global reputation here by people seeking to avoid paying their fair share of tax. It is a real problem. It's a problem to the point where reputable international newspapers and magazines are naming New Zealand as a tax haven. That is an issue. A bill that changed that, a bill that sorted out that issue would have been transformational. Mr. Speaker, I'm not saying that the points in this bill, that the changes in this bill aren't necessary. What I am saying is they are not transformational. What I'm also saying, Mr. Speaker, is that we have a whole lot of issues within our tax system at the moment that demand urgent attention on behalf of the Minister, and I would guess urgent attention on behalf of the Ministry to actually get this right, not only for the integrity of our tax system, but also for the integrity of our global reputation. Mr. Speaker, let's have a look at some of the things in this bill. As the Minister outlined, it does make some pretty common sense amendments. For example, the Commissioner can now receive emails, or the IRD department can send out emails, and that is acceptable. I have one slight concern about that. The Inland Revenue Department has stated that, and I quote, "Cutting paper use and increasing digital services for the Inland Revenue customers will see annual paper savings equivalent to 1,900 trees, or nearly 16 million sheets of A4 paper." Now, as our forestry spokesperson, I have a slight concern that we're actually not using trees and adding value here in New Zealand instead of exporting the logs overseas. But, Mr. Speaker, all this bill does is bring the system into the 21st century. Should have been done a number of years ago, and I'm assuming actually what it actually does is it codifies or legislates what is happening at this point in time. There are a couple of amendments here that I would like to talk about. One is the refinement to the personal tax summaries. This is reasonably important for a whole lot of people. Currently, Mr. Speaker, what happens is if a wage or salary earner needs an end-of-year assessment, they can ask the Commissioner for a personal tax summary to confirm any amount of tax refund. The bill proposes, well, what the bill will do, and they can get that within 30 days. And if it's less than $200 of an unconfirmed summary, then the IRD just pays into a bank account. What the bill actually does is reduces the time from 30 days to 15 days, and it increases the amount, the unconfirmed amount, from $200 to $600. Now, why this is so important, Mr. Speaker, is there's over 200,000 people in this country paying secondary tax. A lot of those people actually pay more tax than is necessary, and I would suggest that this bill, this provision actually will help them. So I've said it before and I'll say it again, to anyone listening to this debate, if they pay secondary tax, I urge you to request a personal tax summary, to phone up the IRD, make sure you've got your IRD number there, and you could be in for a very pleasant surprise. In the past, if you didn't do anything, you might have got $200. Now, if you don't do anything, you can get up to $600 within 15 days. So I urge people to do that. The other thing also is there's a special tax code certificate. This may seem slightly minor. What it does, an employee can apply for a special tax code for their New Zealand superannuation or veterans pension income, or their employment income from one or more employers. What I'm hoping this will lead to, Mr. Speaker, is actually the necessity to do away with secondary tax. Secondary tax is paid by people who work 2 or more jobs, and let's make an assumption. Let's make the assumption that people work 2 or more jobs, not because they love working 22 hours a day, but they do it out of economic necessity. And the problem we've got with the tax system as it stands is in that second job, they pay secondary tax. There's a good reason for it. It's a withholding tax. What was happening in the past is people who were working 2 jobs ended up with a big tax bill at the end of the year, which they couldn't afford, and was a massive imposition. The withholding tax, secondary tax, is meant to have mitigated that, but what it does mean, it's a major impost on people, and the IRD at this point in time actually owes Kiwis about $750 million in overpaid tax. And a decent chunk of that, it's hard to quantify how much, but a decent chunk of that is secondary tax. And the thing about it is after 4 years, it drops off. So again, I would urge people who pay secondary tax, who have 2 or more jobs, to actually phone up the IRD and see if they are owed any money. Another interesting point in this bill, Mr. Speaker, is it repeals special home loan ownership savings account. Now, these are savings accounts that were closed in 1986, believe it or not. There was a provision in there, if you had more than $10,000, you could claim tax credits, etc., etc. But the IRD says there are still a number of these accounts in existence. Amazing. And it's likely a number of these won't have been operated for 25 years. What this bill does do is it will allow the relevant financial institution, and usually the bank, not always, but usually a bank, to close the accounts without having to pay back the tax credits, as is currently the case. So again, I would urge anyone who is listening, or if you know anyone who has one of these old home ownership savings accounts, to get to the bank as soon as possible and make sure you claim those tax credits. Because as soon as this bill is passed into law, those tax credits are no longer available. Mr. Speaker, we are supporting this bill because there's a whole lot of common sense amendments here around things like automatic signatures. As I said, it brings the tax system into the 21st century. But, Mr. Speaker, yet again, another tax bill in this House which is certainly not transformational. It is a missed opportunity, but most importantly, Mr. Speaker, it does not deal with the substantive issues we have with our tax system in this country at the moment, and they are New Zealand being seen as a tax haven, and that posing a massive risk to our global reputation and the integrity of our tax system. That is a concern. And the second one is the number of people who are actually avoiding paying tax because they declare it as they buy property for a yield and not as capital gain. So this does not deal with the substantive issues that are afflicting our tax system, but we do support it. It is common sense. Onwards and upwards, let's hope. Thank you very much.
I call David Bennett.